The red numbers didn't just fall, they cascaded down the screens, a digital hemorrhage that turned the trading floor into a riot of expensive suits and desperate shouting. While senior traders, men who boasted about their iron nerves over scotch, crumbled into their ergonomic chairs, clutching phones like lifelines, I remained anchored. That's when I felt it. The weight of a gaze heavier than the market cap we were losing. Amelia, the head of global trading, stood motionless in the center of the chaos, her eyes locked specifically, terrifyingly, on mine. The sound of a market crash isn't a crash at all. It's a roar. It is the collective sound of 300 voices rising in panic, the frantic clatter of plastic keys being struck with violent force, and the shrill, incessant ringing of phones that no one dares to answer. The air on the floor grew heavy, thick with the scent of stale espresso and the sharp, acrid tang of fear. It's a distinct smell, like ozone and sour sweat, and it permeated everything, clinging to the fabric of my blazer. The server banks hummed louder, generating a physical heat that pressed against the back of my neck, but my skin felt cold. The adrenaline hit me differently than it hit the others. For them, it was a stimulant for hysteria, a chemical push toward collapse. For me, it was a clarifying agent. The noise faded into a dull drone, and the only thing that mattered was the execution of the exit strategy. I watched my portfolio bleed out, millions vanishing in seconds, but my hands remained steady on the terminal. I realized the magnitude of the losses. Careers were ending in real time around me, but I kept the mask of competence intact. I was a junior analyst, usually invisible, a ghost in the machine of high finance. But today, amidst the wreckage, I felt hyper-visible. Amelia moved through the disaster with a terrifying precision. Her commands were short, sharp, cutting through the wall of noise like a scalpel. She was conducting the collapse with a ruthlessness that was almost beautiful to watch. She stood near the central podium, a stark vertical line in a room of people who were physically folding in on themselves. It wasn't a casual stance. It was an assessment. The contrast was jarring. Here I was, 3 years out of university, wearing a blazer that cost less than the lunch tab of the man sobbing 2 desks over, and I was the only one matching her energy. The hierarchy of the floor usually dictated that I keep my head down, eyes on the screen, invisible until summoned. But the crash had flattened the hierarchy just as effectively as it had flattened the index. We were all just survivors on a sinking ship, and she was the captain, noting who was still bailing water and who had given up. The tension coiled tight between us, a thread of static electricity that ignored the devastation on the screens. As the afternoon wore on, the frantic energy curdled into a heavy, suffocating depression. The shouting died down, replaced by the shuffling of feet and the murmurs of defeated men packing their bags. The cleaning crew moved in, sweeping up the debris of the day, shredded papers, broken stress balls, the physical detritus of financial ruin. The room slowly emptied, the energy draining out until the floor felt hollow. The roar faded, leaving only the aggressive hum of the cooling systems trying to keep the servers from melting down. The fluorescent lights seemed to buzz with a harsher frequency now that the human noise was gone. I remained at my desk, the glow of the monitors illuminating the empty rows around me. I watched the last of the senior traders exit the double doors, leaving me alone in the bullpen. The silence that followed was heavy, expectant. I sat there, the last junior analyst at the last active terminal, listening to the hum of the electronics. The silence on the floor wasn't just an absence of noise. It was a physical weight, pressurized and heavy, like the air inside a diving bell. The trading floor, usually a cathedral of ambition, had become a graveyard. The absence of shouting felt louder than the screaming was. I sat there, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, not typing, just feeling the residual heat of the machine. The blue light from the monitors cast long, unnatural shadows across the carpet, turning the discarded paper cups and crumpled notes into strange, abstract shapes. I was the last artifact of the day's violence, a relic left behind when the tide of panic receded. Then I heard it. The cadence was unmistakable. It wasn't the frantic, shuffling gait of a trader rushing to cover a margin call, nor the heavy, defeated tread of someone packing up a cardboard box. It was a sharp, rhythmic percussion, heels striking the industrial carpet with absolute intent. Click, click, click. The sound cut through the hum of the cooling fans, getting louder, closer. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. The air behind me shifted, the temperature changing as someone stepped into my personal radius. The hair on my arms stood up, not from cold, but from a sudden, prickling awareness. Amelia stopped right at the edge of my desk. I slowly swiveled my chair, the mechanism groaning softly in the quiet. She looked immaculate. While the rest of the floor looked like they had been through a physical brawl, ties loosened, shirts stained with sweat, hair wild, Amelia looked as if she had just stepped out of a salon. Her blazer was buttoned, her posture rigid, her expression unreadable. She wasn't looking at the screens, at the red percentages that had ruined half the firm. She was looking at my hands. 340 points, she said, her voice low, a smooth contralto that seemed to vibrate in the empty space between us. That's what the index lost in the last hour. I saw grown men, veterans with 20 years on the floor, weeping into their hands. She took a step closer, entering the zone that corporate HR would definitely define as inappropriate. But you didn't even blink. I was doing my job, I said, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears, rougher than usual. You were doing more than that, she corrected, a small, dangerous smile playing at the corner of her mouth. She leaned forward, resting her hip against the edge of my desk, invading my workspace with a casual arrogance that made my breath hitch. I was watching you from the podium. You were the only one who didn't sweat. Everyone else was dissolving, and you looked like you were solving a crossword puzzle. She reached out, her hand hovering for a second before her fingers brushed the plastic ID badge clipped to my lapel. She didn't need to check it. She knew exactly who I was. We all knew who she was. But she tilted the badge up anyway, her knuckles grazing the fabric of my blouse, the contact sending a jolt of static through me. Junior analyst, she read, her eyes flickering up to meet mine, dark and amused. A little overqualified for data entry, aren't we? That level of ice in the veins usually costs a lot more per hour. My pulse, which had remained stubbornly slow while millions of dollars evaporated, suddenly hammered against my ribs. I like to stay focused. I can see that. She let go of the badge, letting it snap back against my blazer. The sound was sharp in the quiet. She didn't move away, though. She stayed there, leaning in, her scent, something complex like sandalwood and expensive amber, overriding the smell of stale coffee. You know, usually I'd fire anyone still sitting here. It implies they have nowhere else to be. I'm just finishing the postmortem report, I lied. Forget the report. The market's dead. It's not going to complain if we leave the autopsy for the morning. She pushed off the desk, standing to her full height. It was a command, disguised as a casual observation. My office. I have a bottle of Japanese whiskey that costs more than your first car. It's significantly better than the swill they serve in the break room, and I hate drinking alone. She didn't wait for an answer. She turned on her heel, the motion fluid and sharp, and walked away toward the glass-walled executive suite at the far end of the floor. It wasn't a question. It was a directive. And as I watched her walk away, the silence of the room rushing back in to fill the space she left, I realized I had absolutely no intention of disobeying. I locked my screen, the black mirror reflecting a face I barely recognized, flushed, wide-eyed, and terrified, and stood up to follow her into the lion's den. Walking into Amelia's office was like stepping into a decompression chamber. The heavy glass door clicked shut behind me, instantly severing the connection to the trading floor. The hum of the servers, the phantom echoes of shouting, the aggressive buzz of the fluorescent lights, it all vanished. The silence here was different. It wasn't the heavy, dead silence of the bullpen. It was a rich, cultivated silence, the kind of quiet that costs a small fortune. The room smelled of deep, cured leather and the faint, smoky sweetness of the amber perfume she wore, amplified now in the enclosed space. It was intoxicating, a sensory shift that made my head swim slightly. The lighting was low, amber-hued lamps replacing the harsh overheads, casting soft pools of gold on the mahogany desk. And there was the view. The far wall was a sheet of glass, framing the skyline like a captured trophy. The lights of the financial district burned cold and distant, a circuit board of ambition that felt a million miles away, even though we were standing in its heart. Amelia walked past her massive desk without glancing at her screens once. She went straight to a sleek, mid-century console that looked like it belonged in a gallery. With a sigh that seemed to release the tension of the entire fiscal quarter, she kicked off her heels. One, then the other. They landed on the plush rug with a soft thud. It was such a human, unguarded gesture that I couldn't look away. She reached up and undid the top button of her structured blazer, rolling her shoulders back. "You can relax, she said, her back to me as she reached for a crystal decanter. "I'm not going to write you up for a dress code violation if you unbutton that collar. You look like you're about to suffocate." I reached up and loosened the top button of my blouse, the air hitting my throat feeling suddenly cool. "Old habits," I murmured. "They tell us in orientation that a buttoned collar projects reliability." "Reliability is overrated," Amelia countered. She pulled the stopper from the decanter, the glass chiming musically. "Resilience is what matters, and you have that in spades." She poured the amber liquid, the glug 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 sound rich and heavy in the quiet room. She didn't ask if I wanted ice. She knew I didn't. She turned around, holding 2 heavy tumblers, and walked toward me. In her stocking feet, she was shorter, losing the imposing height the stilettos gave her, but she felt even more dangerous, more real. She stopped intimately close, invading my personal space again, but with a different energy this time. It wasn't an intimidation tactic. It was a gravitational pull. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on the cheap fabric of my blazer, the sensible cut of my slacks. "We really need to do something about the wardrobe, though," she teased, her voice dropping an octave, slipping under my skin. This junior analyst trying to look invisible aesthetic, it doesn't suit you. Not anymore. You're too interesting for polyester blends. "I'm working with a junior analyst budget," I shot back, emboldened by the whiskey in her hand. "Invest in yourself," she said softly. She extended the glass. As I reached for it, her fingers brushed against mine. Her skin was cool, contrasting with the flush of heat rising in my own. She didn't pull away immediately. She let the contact linger, a deliberate circuit closing between us. For a second, the glass was the only thing tethering us to the professional world. "Cheers to the end of the world." "To the end of the world," I echoed. We drank. The whiskey was smooth, smoky, and burned pleasantly on the way down, settling in my stomach like a warm coal. The power dynamic in the room shifted with that first sip. The boss and the subordinate had been left on the other side of the glass door. In here, we were just 2 women who had watched an empire crumble and walked away without a scratch. "Come sit," she said, gesturing to the leather seating area near the window. "My feet are killing me, And I want to hear how you managed to keep your heart rate under 100 while the Dow Jones was free-falling. I followed her to the low, dark leather sofa. She sat down, tucking one leg under her, completely shedding the head of global trading persona. I sat next to her, close enough that when I settled in, my knee was just inches from hers. The air between us felt charged, thick with the unspoken, and suddenly, the crash felt like the best thing that could have happened. The leather groaned softly as I shifted, the sound impossibly loud in the quiet office. Outside the glass, the financial world was burning. Careers were being incinerated, and the global economy was bracing for impact. But in here, the only volatility that mattered was the sudden, sharp spike in tension between the two of us. Amelia swirled the amber liquid in her glass, watching the vortex with a look of supreme satisfaction, like a chemist admiring a volatile reaction that had gone exactly according to plan. "People get so sentimental about the numbers," Amelia said, her voice breaking the silence. "They treat the market like it's a living thing that they can plead with. But it's not alive. It's a mechanism. It's a machine designed to correct inefficiencies." She took a slow sip, her eyes never leaving the liquid. "And sometimes, the machine needs to break to reset. I love the ruin, you know? I love the wreckage. It clears the board. It strips away the pretenders and leaves only the people who actually know how to survive." "That's a cold way to look at 300 people losing their bonuses," I said, the whiskey loosening my tongue just enough to let the truth slip out. "Heat is for the desperate," she countered smoothly. "Cold represents clarity. You were cold today. That's why you're sitting here drinking a 30-year-old single malt instead of packing a cardboard box." I took a drink, letting the burn settle the flutter in my stomach. "You weren't just cold, Amelia. You were bored." She froze, the glass halfway to her lips. She turned her head slowly to look at me, her expression sharpening. "Excuse me? I saw you at 10 this morning," I continued, realizing I was crossing a line but unable to stop. The adrenaline from the crash hadn't left. It had just changed frequency. "You looked like you were watching paint dry. You were signing approvals without even reading them. But the second the index dropped, the moment the panic started, you woke up. You didn't look worried. You looked relieved. For a second, I thought I had gone too far." Her eyes narrowed, assessing me with that same terrifying precision she used on the trading floor. Then, she laughed. It wasn't the polite practice laugh she used with the board of directors. It was a low, genuine sound that rumbled in her chest, rich and dark. "You are incredibly observant," she said, a smile lingering on her lips. "That's dangerous. Most people in this building only see what I want them to see. They see the title, the suit, the reputation. You're seeing the boredom." She shifted on the sofa, angling her body toward me, closing the distance between our knees by another fraction of an inch. "You're right. Stability is tedious. It's a flat line. I prefer the spike. I prefer the moment when everything hangs in the balance." "You like the risk," I said. "I like the control," she corrected. "And I like seeing who can handle the drop." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a murmur that felt like a physical touch. "You're wasted down there, you know, sitting in that bullpen, filing reports that no one reads. It's a criminal underutilization of your assets. You have an intelligence that's sharp. Predatory, almost. I like it." "I'm just a junior analyst," I deflected, my voice barely a whisper. "Stop saying that," she commanded softly. "That's the costume you wear. I saw you today. I saw your hands." Her gaze dropped to my hands, which were clutching the heavy crystal glass. While everyone else was shaking, while men twice your age were trembling so hard they couldn't type, your hands were perfectly steady, rhythmically perfect. Efficient, deliberate. She looked back up at me, her eyes dark with an intensity that made the air in the room feel suddenly thin. It was Distracting, she admitted. Watching you work. Wondering if you're that steady with everything you touch. Wondering if you handle every high-pressure situation with that kind of beautiful, terrifying control. The compliment hit me harder than the whiskey. It wasn't just praise, it was an acknowledgement of the person I kept hidden beneath the cheap blazer and the quiet demeanor. The air between us thickened, heavy with the scent of sandalwood and the unspoken question of just how far this game was going to go. My heart hammered against my ribs, a stark contrast to the steady hands she admired. Amelia set her glass down on the table with a decisive click. She stood up, the movement fluid and graceful, and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. She didn't look back, but she extended a hand behind her, fingers uncurled in a silent invitation. "Come here," she said, her voice soft but commanding. "You need to see the view from the edge." I left the warmth of the leather sofa, the distance between us feeling like a physical terrain I had to cross, a minefield of unspoken intent. When I stepped up beside her, the heat radiating from her body was palpable, a sultry, living warmth that stood in stark contrast to the frigid sheet of glass in front of us. Down below, the financial district was a sprawling, electrified circuit board. The chaos of the trading floor was reduced to silent, blinking lights, clusters of white and amber that looked beautiful only because we were too high up to hear the screaming. It was a deceptive tranquility, a cold, digital map of a city that would eat you alive if you missed a step. "See that?" Amelia asked, her voice quiet, barely disturbing the air. She didn't point. She just stared out into the abyss of the skyline, her reflection ghosted against the dark glass. From up here, you can't see the panic. You can't see the sweat. It just looks like a machine working exactly as designed. Efficient, cold, distant. "It looks lonely," I ventured, testing the waters, watching her profile rather than the view. "It is," she admitted, the admission slipping out with a sigh that seemed to deflate her rigid posture just a fraction. "Leadership is just a fancy word for isolation. Head of global trading. It sounds powerful, doesn't it? Like I hold the reins. But it's not a title. It's a target. Every man on that floor, every board member on the floor above us, they're waiting. They're watching for the hairline fracture. They're waiting for the moment I blink, the moment I hesitate, so they can tear me down and replace me with someone who looks like them. Someone who plays golf at the right clubs and laughs at the right jokes." She turned slightly, catching my eye in the reflection. "I have to be bulletproof. I have to be a monolith. I can't afford to be a person. I certainly can't afford to be a woman who—" She trailed off, the sentence hanging in the air, heavy with implication. "Who?" I prompted gently, stepping a fraction closer. "Who has a life," she finished, though we both knew that wasn't the word she meant. "I keep my life siloed, hermetically sealed. I don't bring my personal life into this building. I don't bring my desires here. Because the moment I do, the moment I show them that I want something other than profit, I give them a weapon. And I don't hand out weapons. Softness is blood in the water here." "I understand silos," I said, looking at my own reflection, a pale ghost next to her vibrant shadow. "Why do you think I sat there today while the world burned down? Why do you think I didn't flinch when the numbers turned red?" Amelia turned her head, her eyes catching the reflection of the city lights, glittering with curiosity. "Tell me." "Because I learned the hard way what happens when you let the mask slip," I said, the memory rising up, cold and sharp. 3 years ago, I didn't have the armor. I wore my heart on my sleeve. I let myself want things. I let myself want someone. I swallowed the lump in my throat, the old ache dull but present. And when it fell apart, it didn't just break my heart, it broke my focus. The fallout nearly cost me my career before it even started. So I calcified. I built a wall of professionalism so high and so thick that nothing could get in and nothing could get out. I learned to separate the desire from the duty. I learned to turn the volume down until the world was just silence and math. Amelia studied me, her gaze intense, stripping away the last of my defenses. "So we're the same," she murmured. "We're both hiding in plain sight, using our careers as shields." "It's effective armor," I whispered. "It's heavy armor," she corrected. "And it's exhausting." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with the sudden, terrifying intimacy of being known. We were two women standing at the top of a broken world, admitting that the strength everyone admired was just scar tissue we'd polished until it shined. "I'm tired of the wait," Amelia said softly. She turned away from the window, her movement deliberate, blocking out the cold lights of the city. She faced me fully, her body eclipsing the view, becoming the only thing in my line of sight. The circuit board of the city vanished, replaced by the dark, intense reality of her eyes. "I'm tired of the silos." She leaned back against the reinforced glass, the darkness of the night sky framing her silhouette. The city lights were just a halo around her now, irrelevant background noise to the singular focus she had turned on me. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. It wasn't just the quiet of the office anymore. It was the heavy, pressurized silence of a negotiation entering its final, critical phase. She crossed her arms, not defensively, but with the posture of someone who had already calculated the odds and knew she held the winning hand. "You're cautious," she observed, the statement landing with the weight of a verdict. "You built that wall of professionalism brick by brick. I respect the architecture, really, I do. It's solid, it's impenetrable. It kept you upright today when everyone else was collapsing." She tilted her head, a lock of hair falling across her cheek, softening the sharp angles of her face. "But caution has a diminishing return. You play it safe with your career because you think it protects you. Tell me, do you play it safe with women, too?" The question was a breach of protocol so severe it would have given HR a stroke. But in the dim amber light of her office, it felt like the only question that had ever mattered. My breath caught in my throat, a sudden hitch that betrayed my composure. She wasn't asking about my dating history. She was asking about my courage. She was challenging the very foundation of the armor I had just admitted to wearing. "I don't play it safe," I said, my voice steady despite the rapid drumming of my heart against my ribs. I took a step forward, invading her space just as she had invaded mine earlier. "I calculate risk. There's a difference. Avoiding risk is cowardice. Calculating it is strategy. I don't bet unless I know the spread." "And what's the spread right now?" she asked, her voice dropping to a sultry murmur. "Volatility is high," I countered, holding her gaze. "But the potential yield is significant." Amelia laughed again, that low, rich sound that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. She uncrossed her arms and let her hands rest at her sides, open and inviting. Her eyes didn't leave my face. They traced the line of my jaw with a tactile weight, as if she were touching me from across the few feet of space that remained between us. It was a look of undisguised appreciation, stripping away the junior analyst title and seeing the woman beneath. "You have a quiet strength," she said softly. "It's not loud or performative like the men downstairs. It's endurance. I saw it today, but I've seen it before. You think you're invisible, sitting at that terminal in the back row. You think because you keep your head down, no one notices the resilience. But I noticed. The air in the room grew thicker, charged with static. You noticed? I've been watching you for months, she admitted, the confession hanging in the air like smoke. Since Q3. I saw you handle the calm just as well as you handled the storm. I watched you in the elevator, staring at the numbers changing, always thinking. always processing. I watched you fix that error on the Asian markets account before anyone else even caught it. You didn't ask for credit. You just fixed it. She took a step toward me, her heels silent on the plush rug. I was waiting for a crack in the facade. I was waiting for a moment where the professional mask slipped just enough for me to see what was underneath. The crash, I realized, the pieces falling into place. The crash, she confirmed. The market implosion was a tragedy for the portfolio, yes, but for me, it was a catalyst. It was the sledgehammer that finally broke the routine. I saw you standing there in the chaos, completely unshaken, and I knew I couldn't let you walk out of this building tonight without knowing if the fire inside matched the ice on the outside. The distance between us had vanished. We were standing in the center of the room, the wreckage of the financial world forgotten, the only currency remaining being the undeniable magnetic pull between us. The correction had happened. The market had reset, and now there was nothing left to hide behind. The space between us had ceased to be empty air. It was now a pressurized field, dense with a static charge that made the fine hairs on my arms stand up. It was the kind of proximity that usually precedes a collision, terrifying and inevitable. I could smell the amber in her perfume, a warm, resinous scent that seemed to wrap around my throat, heavier now than the smell of the whiskey. I could see the faint pulse jumping in the hollow of her throat, a betrayal of the calm facade she wore like armor. It was suffocating, but in the way a deep dive is suffocating, heavy, encompassing, and filled with the promise of depth. Amelia took another step, invading the last inch of my personal territory. We were now close enough that I had to tilt my head back slightly to meet her gaze. The power dynamic was still there, but it had mutated. It wasn't vertical anymore, boss to subordinate. It was lateral, magnetic. Two forces of nature finally acknowledging they were in the same orbit. You know, Amelia said, her voice dropping that octave again, finding a register that bypassed my ears and resonated directly in my chest. I watched $1 billion evaporate today. I watched the futures market collapse like a house of cards. I watched the career of every vice president on the floor turn into dust. She paused, her eyes searching mine, dark and unreadable in the low light. And honestly, this is the most interesting thing that has happened all day. Standing here, with you, waiting to see if the junior analyst has the nerve to match the senior trader. I felt a flush rise from my chest to my neck, a heat that had nothing to do with the alcohol. The compliment was a weapon, disarming me completely. I forced myself to hold her gaze, to not retreat into the safety of deference. Is this a performance review? I asked, my voice steady but breathless, testing the boundaries of this new reality. Because I think HR requires a third party for those. Amelia smiled, a slow, predatory curving of her lips that made my knees feel like water. This isn't a performance review, darling. This is an acquisition strategy. The words hung there, heavy with implication. Acquisition, ownership, merging. It was the language of the floor, twisted into something far more intimate. Hostile or friendly, I whispered, playing the game because it was the only way to keep my footing. That depends entirely on the target company, she murmured. She leaned in closer until her breath ghosted against my cheek. The risk profile is high, I'll admit. If we cross this line, the walls come down, the silos shatter. If anyone outside that door finds out, the gossip alone would be enough to tank the stock price. I'm the head of global trading, fraternizing with a junior analyst. It's a compliance nightmare. It's a career suicide pact. And yet, I said, watching her eyes, you're not withdrawing the offer. I never withdraw when the fundamentals are this strong, she said, her voice a velvety hum. The logic says we should shake hands, finish our drinks, and go back to being strangers who nod in the hallway. The logic says I should send you home and go back to being the ice queen. She shifted her weight, her body heat radiating against mine, a tangible force. But the logic is failing. The algorithm is broken. Because looking at you right now, seeing the way you're looking at me, the career risk feels abstract. The pull feels concrete. It feels inevitable. I'm not afraid of the risk, I said. And I meant it. The job, the title, the safe little life I had built, it all felt small compared to the magnitude of the woman standing in front of me. I told you, I calculate it. And I think the upside potential outweighs the volatility. Smart girl, she breathed. The air felt too thin to breathe. The city outside, the crash, the millions lost. It was all just noise. The only signal that mattered was the heat radiating from her. Amelia moved then. It wasn't a tentative gesture, it was decisive. Her hand reached out, crossing the final divide. Her palm settled firmly against the curve of my waist, the contact electric, grounding and shocking all at once. Her thumb pressed into the fabric of my blouse, burning through the cheap polyester to the skin beneath. It was a claim, a signature on a contract I hadn't realized I was negotiating until this very moment. She pulled me in, just an inch, but it changed the gravity of the entire room. The physical contact was the final breach of the firewall. Her hand on my waist felt like a brand, cool fingers pressing into the feverish heat of my skin through the thin fabric of my blouse. It was a grounding force, heavy and absolute, anchoring me to the plush rug, to the room, to her. The static charge that had been building between us all afternoon, that invisible, humming tension that had started the moment the market opened and intensified with every falling point, finally found its conductor. It snapped into place with a clarity that was almost violent. The metaphor of the suture struck me then. Not just a closing of distance, but a binding. We were two separate entities, two different tiers of a rigid hierarchy, being stitched together by the sheer force of shared survival and unspoken desire. The silence in the room deepened, becoming a vacuum that sucked the air out of my lungs. Amelia didn't move to close the final inch yet. She held me there, her grip firm but testing, her eyes searching mine with an intensity that stripped me bare. She needed to know. She needed the verbal confirmation that this wasn't just the whiskey or the adrenaline or the trauma of the crash. She needed to know that I was calculating this risk just as clearly as she was. "Tell me to stop," she murmured, her voice rough, a low friction against the quiet. It wasn't a taunt. It was an exit ramp. She was giving me one last chance to pull the ripcord, to remember my place, to step back into the safety of the subordinate role and walk out the door with my career intact. I looked at her, the sharp line of her jaw, the dark intelligence in her eyes, the slight parting of her lips, and I realized that safety was the last thing I wanted. I didn't want the exit ramp. I wanted the collision. "Don't you dare," I whispered. The permission broke the dam. Amelia made a sound, something between a sigh and a growl, and her other hand came up to cup the nape of my neck, her thumb tracing the sensitive skin behind my ear. Then she leaned in, and the world narrowed down to the point of contact. The kiss wasn't frantic. It wasn't the desperate, messy fumbling of two people trying to forget a disaster. It was slow, deliberate, consuming. It was a savoring, a low-frequency burn that started in my mouth and rolled down my spine. She tasted of peat and smoke, the 30-year-old whiskey lingering on her tongue, mixed with the unique, electric taste of her own heat. It was a sultry, sophisticated flavor, rich with complexity. Her mouth moved against mine with an expertise that made my knees buckle, forcing me to clutch the lapels of her blazer to stay upright. She didn't rush. She explored. She mapped the tension in my jaw, the softness of my lower lip, the ragged cadence of my breathing. It was a takeover, methodical and complete. The silence of the room amplified everything. The rustle of fabric as I pulled her closer, the sharp intake of breath as her hand tightened in my hair, the heavy, rhythmic thud of my own heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. Time dissolved. The market, the city, the losses, they were abstract concepts belonging to a different timeline. The only reality was the weight of her body against mine, the firm pressure of her hands, and the intoxicating, dizzying realization that the head of global trading was kissing me like I was the only asset that held any value. When she finally pulled back, she didn't go far. She broke the seal of our mouths, but kept us in the embrace, resting her forehead against mine. We stood there, breathing the same air, eyes closed, caught in the heavy, suspended gravity of the aftermath. The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was comfortable, warm, and filled with a new kind of oxygen. I kept my eyes closed for a moment longer, breathing in the scent of her, amber, smoke, and the subtle, terrifying fragrance of power that had softened into something undeniably human. There was no regret. That was the first thing I checked for, scanning my internal emotional state like a ticker tape. There was no panic, no sudden realization of a career-ending error, no urge to run back to the safety of my cubicle. There was just the steady, thrumming certainty that the world had shifted on its axis, and I preferred this new rotation. Amelia pulled back just enough to look me in the eye, her hands sliding down from the nape of my neck to rest heavily on my shoulders. Her lipstick was slightly smudged, a chaotic variable that thrilled me more than any market rally ever could. "We can't undo this," she said, her voice low and raspy. It wasn't a warning. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the same gravity she used to announce quarterly earnings. "The trade is executed. The settlement date is immediate." "I don't want to hedge my position," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt, surprised by my own boldness. I reached up, my fingers daring to brush a stray lock of hair from her cheek, tucking it behind her ear. "I'm long on this investment." Amelia laughed, a soft, breathless sound that vibrated through her hands on my shoulders. "You and your metaphors. You're going to be the death of me. Or the best thing that ever happened to this firm." She leaned in, pressing a quick, hard kiss to the corner of my mouth, a punctuation mark on the chaos of the evening. "But listen to me. The floor is a shark tank. If they smell blood or affection, they'll frenzy. Downstairs, I am the head of global trading, and you are the analyst who is surprisingly good at data entry. We have to be disciplined." "Discretion," I agreed, nodding. "I know how to be invisible, remember? It's my specialty." "Not to me," she countered immediately, her gaze sharpening with possessive intensity. "Never to me again. You don't get to hide in the back row anymore. In public, we play the game. We maintain the silos. But in private," she paused, her hands smoothing the lapels of my cheap blazer, her fingers lingering over the fabric. "In private, we explore the merger. Thoroughly." She stepped back, the loss of contact hitting me like a physical chill. She turned to the reflection in the glass, not to look at the city, but to inspect the damage we'd done to her composure. She buttoned her blazer, the crisp snap of the fabric signaling a return to armor, but her eyes in the reflection were still soft, still watching me. "I have to say," she teased, adjusting her collar with practiced efficiency, "for a junior analyst with a budget wardrobe, your performance metrics just significantly exceeded quarterly projections." I might have to revise my guidance for the fiscal year. I aim to maximize shareholder value, I shot back, emboldened by the lingering taste of her on my lips. Cheeky, she murmured, arching an eyebrow as she smoothed her skirt. I like it. Keep that energy. You're going to need it. We spent the next minute in a quiet, intimate ritual of reconstruction. I buttoned my collar, smoothing out the wrinkles she'd pressed into my shirt. She slid her feet back into her heels, rising back to her imposing height, reclaiming the physical stature of her office. But the dynamic was irrevocably altered. When she looked at me now, it wasn't an assessment of competence. It was a shared secret. The financial district outside was still glowing, a cold monument to money and stress, but it felt irrelevant. The noise, the panic, the crashing numbers, it was just background radiation. The real value wasn't in the servers or the bank accounts. It was right here, in the quiet space between us. Ready? She asked, moving toward the door. She didn't open it immediately. She waited for me to stand beside her, her hand hovering near mine for a fleeting second before dropping to her side. Ready, I lied. I wasn't ready for the world to come back in, but I walked with her anyway. We walked to the elevator in silence, the echo of her heels distinct against the hum of the building. When the doors slid open, we stepped into the metal box, standing shoulder to shoulder, but not touching. As the doors slid shut, sealing us in, I caught her reflection in the polished steel, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. The market would open tomorrow, brutal and loud, but the landscape had fundamentally shifted. If you've ever found value in an unexpected crash, subscribe to see where this investment leads.